Our water connection acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land throughout Australia and their connection to country, sky, water, and community. We extend our respect to the traditional custodians of the place where you are listening. This episode is recorded in Kaurna country and Guringai country. Can we ever make water 100% safe? How can understanding risk help us in creating a safer water future? This episode is all about water risk, how to recognize it, and how to communicate it in a way that sparks action. My name is Jess Bordekis. I'm on a mission to increase your water curiosity, and this is a Water Connection. To talk all about water risk, I'm honored to be talking today with the water risk doctor, Dr. Annette Davison. Annette is a principal risk specialist with over 35 years of experience in water, environmental policy, and mining risk management. She's the founder, joint owner, and co-CEO of Risk Edge, a risk assessment and management company that specializes in governance, enterprise and water cycle, and resource management risk. In her career, she has guided many organizations, including water utilities, in the development and implementation of water safety and risk management plans. Annette is an internationally recognized expert in several fields, including bioremediation, biodiversity, microbial ecology, water utility due diligence, auditing, and risk management. Among many other awards, she was recognized with the Australian Water Association Water Professional of the Year Award in 2021. Welcome to Water Connection, Annette.
Thank you. That was a very long introduction. I should have cut it down.
No. It was I couldn't get anything else, so I needed to introduce you properly. So thank you very much for coming today to Water Connection. And let's start very simple. Like, how can we define risk, Annette?
So if we go to the International Risk Management Standard, ISO 31000, that talks about risk being the impact of uncertainty on achieving your objectives. So we normally think, well, in the water industry, there's a big emphasis on risk being negative, but it can actually be positive as well. And so we're starting to focus on the value creation that risk management and risk assessment can actually give you.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so it's the uncertainty when you make a decision. That's kind of like the definition that we would give. That's really good. And why is it important for water utilities or for companies within the water sector to manage risk?
So I guess there are a couple of issues. First of all, you don't want to fall foul of the law. So compliance is a huge issue. So understanding where your uncertainties lie from a compliance perspective is really important to make sure that you don't provide, unfit water to your customers, that you don't have the regulator on your back and, that you pass your audits and that type of thing. But it's also about making sure that you're not just complying, but you're actually performing. So you're going, you're going beyond that compliance mentality, and risk can actually help you unlock that value creation and help you identify where you can innovate as well.
Yeah, for sure, because it's it's a way that water utilities, I guess, can make decisions around different things and in what the level of risk that they would be exposed in certain things. I had a question here, like, can risk be reduced to zero?
That's a good one. If we throw loads and loads of money at it, but that's not reasonable or feasible, and in the end, you would never get to zero risk anyway. Sorry, I've just seen a water dragon walking on the rock outside, which is very appropriate given this is a water talk.
It is.
So no, we can't ever get down to zero. It's very, very unlikely that we could do that. So we have to work out what sort of risk are we willing to take on and accept. So for public health risk, we do try and get down to zero as much as possible, but then there's how much people are willing to pay for that as well. So as long as we're working within safe boundaries like the Australian Drinking Water Guideline values or the Australian Guidelines for Water Recycling values, then we know, we're in an okay zone. But from that innovation perspective, an organisation might want to take on more financial risk where the reward is higher. So they may want to take on more risk there. So it just depends what objective you're looking at as to where you're looking at that zero risk or some risk.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I figured you couldn't get to zero risk, especially with the definition being uncertainty. You really can't eliminate for sure uncertainty and everything, and especially when we're looking in the future. But you talk about like public health risk and financial risk. What are the type of risks are there?
So, from a public health risk would be things like, gastroenteritis. So, we normally talk about acute risk and chronic risk. So, acute risk is the risk that you have or the impact that you have here and now. So, it can be you ingest some unfit water, a few hours later, you get gastro. You might have, unfortunately, to have vomiting and diarrhea at the same time if you have a norovirus infection, or chronic, where you might have not have something now, but might experience something later, like cancer. But that means you've consumed that particular hazard over the lifetime, say, like a 70-year lifetime or something like that. So that's a type of impact. And then financially, what we're seeing now, especially when we're looking at reliability and water security, we found that organizations had set certain rates for treatment of water that was of a particular standard, shall we say, that was coming in for raw water. And now we're finding, with an increase in regulations, an increase in the hazards that we're finding. I mean, PFAS is the hazard du jour, shall we say, that communities may not be able to pay for the treatment of that water anymore. So then where does the financial risk lie? It really should be borne by the people who have put the contaminant in the environment in the first place, and not the communities who are dealing with the impact of that particular contaminant.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I do have like a couple of questions on that later on. And like, so yeah, I mean, a water utility, which is kind of the angle we're doing right now, it's like it'll be exposed to public health risks, and that's all the compliance part, and then they will have financial risk, I guess, in terms of like the type of investment that they do and the return that they could get, and how far along the uncertainty kind of scale they address that. I would imagine like they are exposed to all the type of risks, maybe like losing trust in people, or like things like that is also considered part of that risk that water utilities need to manage.
Yeah, absolutely. And these days as well, contemporary utilities are getting quite complex. It used to just be drinking water, drainage, sewage services. But now, with the expansion into other products and services such as purified recycled water, if you're a local water utility, you might also have water carting things to deal with, or swimming pools to manage, or spa pools, with your environmental health officers. So there's a plethora of objectives or risk endpoints, as I like to call them, that a utility has to consider. So reputational risk, work health and safety risk, environmental risk, a whole heap of them. So they have to be balanced alongside the public health risk as well.
Yeah.
So it's quite a juggling act.
Yeah. And in that juggling act that you're mentioning, like I had a question here. How do water utilities or experts decide what's safe? What's the point that we say, okay, this is as far as we're going to get in that uncertainty kind of scale and continuum? How do they decide how long, how much risk they want to take?
So a couple of answers to that. So safety is generally a function of guidelines that we follow. So we'll have guideline values that we have to meet that establish fitness for purpose. But it's interesting because sometimes you might have a better guideline or a more stringent guideline in another country. So for a while, we were going to the US EPA for validation guidance, for instance. So we might draw on that as well. So that helps to set the body of evidence for fitness for purpose. So that's for the public health risk. But then for the financial risk, that's something that an organization has to decide for themselves in terms of how much risk they want to take on, and how much they can afford, how much budget they have, how much they need to set aside. So that's very much an organization dependent assessment.
Yeah, for sure. Can imagine. And yeah, like connecting that, like when we talk about water assets, or I don't know, contamination in the tap water that you take, and drinking water guidelines, is kind of easy to see who's responsible of managing that risk, because we have a company, everyone in our houses, where there's a company that is responsible to bring water to us. But what happens with water bodies? Like I've seen that you're very active kind of looking into contamination in natural water bodies or like at discharge at beaches or things like that. Who's responsible then there of the risk management? Because there are many people and many organizations that are kind of interacting with these water bodies.
Well, that's a very good question. Often it's difficult to understand who is responsible. So, what we do first is we like to craft what we call a governogram. And so that sorts out all the custody of water and the responsibility for that custody of water all the way through from source through to endpoint. Once we've done that and we work out where our handover points are and what the water quality objectives are and who's responsible at each handover point, to get to that point, we need to understand who the stakeholders at each point of the supply chain. And by your question, I'm sure you understand that's also a very complex area as well.
Yeah.
So it's really understanding the jurisdictional requirements, the jurisdictional context, the geographical context, the utility context, all of that risk context information. If you don't get that right, then you never get a good outcome. So we spend a lot of time working out, well, who are the stakeholders? What are their drivers? Who's responsible for what, where, when, and why? And make sure that we've got all of that bedded down first. But it is a very complex area, especially in catchment management.
Yes, it sounds very complex. Like especially when you go out and you have places where there are different organizations. The question that I had from that is like, how do you communicate then with those stakeholders? Where like you as a kind of risk management expert and you're trying to convey that message to different stakeholders. What's the best approach there to make people understand that maybe what they're doing here is creating some awful uncertainties and like risks further down the track in this water body?
So a couple of answers to that, I suppose. And I was chuckling because I'm going to tell you something about what my daughter said to me once. So we find that having a multi-stakeholder workshop is a really good way of getting people around the table, hearing what they have to say, and other stakeholders hearing what they have to say as well. And then we can usually start to tease things out. So that's one thing. And the other thing I find too is that just talking to people, just, plain old chatting to people and just hearing about their problems and, what's causing them not to sleep at night is a really big thing. And my elder daughter came out with me once for her work experience. And at the end of it, she said, "Now I know what you do, Mum." And I said, "What's that?" Because I was just on an observation type thing at this stage. And she said, "You just look at people." And I said, "Well, I think I do more than that." But yeah, so looking at people, their body language, hearing what they have to say, is really, really important. And that's where that human element, that social element really comes into stakeholder communication. So I saw something somewhere saying that, just because you're communicating with someone doesn't mean you're engaging. And so it's really important to make sure, and that's why we really like to try and get our risk communication right, because if you don't understand your end user, you're never going to get your message across, and you need to hear what they want and what they need before you design information to, for that particular end user. So that's the space that we're working a lot in now.
Yeah, that's very interesting because it's a matter of understanding each stakeholder priorities, worries, and then you kind of bringing it all together to eventually make them all work together towards managing a risk for a particular place, without I guess creating more I don't know, more fear. I was thinking while I was like preparing for this episode is like, well, we know already, and you kind of mentioned in the your definition of risk, it involves uncertainty, right? And uncertainty can be kind of a bit of settling maybe for communities. How can we as water professionals maybe communicate effectively that uncertainty without, I mean, transmitting our messages that certain things are very important, but without creating alarm or complacency in the other case, like, oh no, everything is super okay, you don't have anything to worry about. How can we manage that balance with the community and in general with other stakeholders outside of the sector?
Yeah, again, I think it comes back to crafting a message using examples that the end user will understand. So we do some discussion with the year 10 students and others up at Kaurna High School, which is our local high school. So the students there talk to them about, our career in water, and, some of the things that they might like to understand as well. So in that particular instance, when you're talking about risk, you might talk about, do you decide to cross at the crossing, or you're running late for class and you're not going to go across at the crossing and you're going to skip across further down where the traffic's coming? That's a much higher risk than actually crossing at the crossing where you've got a red light so you can go across. So starting to put risk into those sorts of contextual components really helps people to understand, oh, now I know. More uncertainty here, more certainty if I do it this way. And so we found that really helps as well.
Yeah, for sure. Trying to use examples and analogies, it would be a good way to get that message across to people. Like I was at the time of that we're recording these is when the whole Los Angeles fires were happening, and like there was a lot of talk about the water system and how the hydrants run dry and like all of these, and people outside of the industry or like in general there was like content out there talking about something went wrong with the water system, something was
Mm,
wrong with them, and you think about it, well, we would never have designed a system to tackle that sort of event, because it's that balance between the risk of that, or like the probability of something like that happening before, and the systems are not prepared for that, because simply you can't design a system to battle a fire for so long. So I put up a post that was comparing it with like network. Everyone trying to make a call at the same time at New Year's Eve, and sometimes that doesn't work. Well, the telecommunication networks are not made for all of us to be making phone calls at the same time. So it's very similar, like in those infrastructure decisions that we make, and how an analogy can help explaining some of those concepts to people.
yeah, we're also finding as well that often information is so disparate. It's spread across many areas, and it's often difficult for people to understand, where do I go to? Where's the hub where I can go to where I really trust the information? So
Yeah.
places like The Conversation, for instance, they're a really good place to start, I find, where you're getting good input from people who are trustworthy, and the writing is actually very good. It's very accessible as well. And we've been working, I mentioned to you, we've been working on putting together a series of cartoon characters as well,
Yes.
for most unwanted of what you don't want to get in your water. And part of the genesis of that was my kids are gamers and love Pokemon and all of that sort of thing as well. And so they would have these little cards that had all of the bits and pieces on them, like danger level, exposure, and, all of these sorts of things. So we've used those concepts to actually highlight the key points in a fun way, but still factual, for the hazards that we're starting to target in the Most Unwanted series. And we're finding that they're being really well received. And my elder daughter actually does the artwork for it too. So it's
Oh,
become a bit
nice.
of a family affair.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great initiative because it's putting people in contact with those things that you don't know that they're there. Even if they're there, you may or may not get sick straight away, but like the risk and things that could be in our water. So it's important to get people closer to that. Yes.
Yeah.
Annette, how do you think understanding risk from a perspective of a water utility or a professional can help us really create a better water future? Like really step up and create a water future for all of us.
I think it has to be across the whole supply chain to make sure that everybody understands how they could impact on the water supply chain and how the water supply chain could impact on them. So what we're finding is, especially for operators who are often told what to do, but not why to do it, once you
Yeah.
start going back and explaining your job is really important, if you don't do it correctly, this could happen. And it's the same with reporting. They might be asked to do samples or reporting on, providing particular data. But if they're never given any feedback on what those data are being used for, and why it's important, it's not going to mean anything. So making sure that people are aware of their importance is really really important as well
Yeah.
in understanding the risk. And for instance, if you, like in procurement is a really important part of provision of safe, reliable water, because if procurement is not done correctly, we're going to get the wrong materials. They might be sourcing cheaper materials that don't meet ASNs at S.4020, for instance, and then we end up with things leaching into the water. So the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines Framework tells us that all involved in the water utility or in the provision of water need to understand what their role is and how they might impact on water. So we've been concentrating our training on particular groups as well to make sure that they understand their roles and responsibilities.
I think that's a great angle, because sometimes it's easy to get focused only on your particular one job that you're doing, or your responsibilities of your role. But as people that work in the water sector, we are working towards something that is a lot bigger than us and very important for the functioning of society. So connecting people to that through the risk of not doing things correctly can definitely make a difference. And I can see how it would it'll give you a sense of purpose as well as a worker. Like, it's not me moving these X, Y, or Z, or in procurement buying X, Y, or Z for a project, but I'm really making sure that people within my community have safe and reliable water, and this is my plate to part. So that's quite interesting. Yes. In preparation for a conversation, I had a look at some of the Risk Edge website and some of the papers that you guys have published so far. And even only in this week, there was one called a white paper called "Are You Being Blue Washed?" which
Yeah.
caught my attention. It was your guide to safeguarding operations and building water resilience. So I had a brief look at it, and in the article that was introduced in it, you highlight how water quality risks can often be overlooked in comparison to water availability. Maybe not specifically for water utilities, because water utilities have very clear guidelines, things that they have to comply. But maybe other actors that are within this catchment or within the world that use water in one way or another. And yet these water quality risks can have severe financial and operational consequences. So why do you think that happens? Why do you think water quality risks are often underestimated? And what are some of those biggest maybe misconceptions that people or organizations outside have around water quality?
I think it comes back to awareness again as well. And, if you look at water, you can see the volume and you can see it flowing, but you can't see what's in it. And so I think it's the water quality aspect is almost invisible, and we need to make it visible. So that's why the awareness piece is really, really important. And I think I was once told that you only get to people once you can get into their hip pocket. So once people understand the financial risk that water quality could actually cause them, and in Sydney, everybody talks about real estate prices. So it's out of control. But I found one example for the paper that was really interesting, and that was where real estate that was near a water body that was subject to cyanobacterial or blue-green algal blooms, I think was a third less in value than houses elsewhere. So even though they had waterfront and they were close to a water body, because that water body was impacted by obviously nutrient runoff, which then led to the blooms, it caused a decrease in the property value. So once you start talking in
And
those
then,
terms, people go,
yes.
yeah,
This is
ah,
important. Yes.
not me house.
Yeah, for sure. Or not my water body around my area. And that's true. Like, we don't really want to do that. So it's a good way to highlight a problem then, and then definitely once it hits people's pockets one way or another, is something that gets more attention. And because as you say, the water quality, we can't really see it. Water is just gonna keep flowing. I guess some water quality is not my area of expertise. There's some stuff like algae blooms that is visible, but there are many other stuff that can happen in water that we just can't see. So it's
Yeah,
definitely important to give it visibility.
absolutely. And I think we've got a lot to learn from First Nations people as well about their reverence for water, not just the amount, but the way it looks, the cultural aspects and everything as well, and the sanctity of water and rivers almost having their own entity as well. And in fact, in some places in the world, rivers are now being granted, legal status almost as a person. So it would be good to see more value attached at that level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. This episode is proudly supported by the Chris Davis AM Fellowship, an initiative of the Australian Water Association. His legacy lives on through this fellowship, empowering efforts to keep his passion for innovation and community impact alive. We're honored to have the support of this fellowship this season too, as we continue to share stories that connect us all to water. Now, back to the episode. Annette, how would you explain your work to someone, to your mate who has nothing to do with the water sector? How would you explain what you do?
That's a really good question. And we've been doing a lot of work on this because I don't just look at people.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm
So
pretty sure.
what we say now is that we help protect people and the environment from exposure to contaminated water. And that's a message that people really understand. So that's the message that we give now. And so we help communities, individuals and organizations provide safe, reliable water.
Yeah, that's perfect. I can see you have spent time thinking about it. Sometimes you ask this question to people and you get really caught up in like technicalities or things like that. And it's like, no, what is the way that you would explain it to this person who has nothing to do with our sector? So it's very,
Yeah.
very interesting.
Thank you.
What would be your message to young water professionals and people that might be listening to you right now?
I cannot recommend the water industry highly enough to anybody. And that's what I always say when we go out and do our, student talks as well. There are so many opportunities in the water industry, and it's not just engineering. I'm a scientist, so it's great to see more scientists coming in, and definitely great to see more women in the industry as well. Although, on a minor note, you do have to queue for the toilet now at conferences, so that's not so good.
That's
Um,
true.
but yeah, and I think too, with things like gaming and all of the things that are coming through now, we should be able to harness those things for improved education, you know, even like the legal side of things, the social side, the psychology. There are so many things that we can use in the water industry, or you could have a profession within the water industry. So I think it's something that really needs to be considered by anybody, thinking about what they might do when they go to university, or even not a university pathway as well.
Yeah, for sure.
With my own kids, that hasn't been something that has been a pathway that we've looked at. So there are alternative pathways that people can use. So lots of ways to move into the industry and lots of ways to move around within the industry as well, which I think is really fantastic.
That's true. That's true. It is something that, yeah, you highlight like there's a lot of work to do for different skills, for different backgrounds, and like, yeah, plenty of things to look forward to. And to wrap up, Annette, why do you work in the water sector?
I fell into it.
Yeah.
I was working in bioremediation to begin with. When I first came to Australia, I worked with Rio Tinto, the mining company. And so little group was working on using microbes to solve all sorts of mining problems, whether it was reduction of halogenated organics or hydrocarbons, or getting intractable ores and using microbes to open them up so you could get the gold out better. So that's how I started working. And then I thought, well, I know about contaminated sites from a scientific perspective, but I don't really know about the legal side. So that's why I went into environmental law, and then from there I got a job with Sydney Water, and that's where I fell into water, and also to risk as well. I never even knew risk, a risk assessment industry existed. So that's
Yeah.
where I fell into risk. So that was my starting water.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, and we have had many DST that is like that. Like it's just something happened in my life, and then I had this opportunity, and then I haven't looked back. And people that have been a bit that knew from the beginning that they want to go into it. So it's very interesting to always hear that part of the conversation and learn from people's careers. So Annette, thank you very much for your time today. I think it was a fantastic opportunity for us to learn about risk. How is the relationship with uncertainty? What type of risk are organizations kind of exposed to, and the importance of like stakeholder engagement and bringing everyone on the journey. Explain the risks that are out there and what can we do to plan for a better future. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. I have to say, I was very anxious about doing this, but you made it really easy. I felt really at ease. So thank you very much.
No, that's okay. It's great to have a conversation, learn from you, and learn from wonderful water professionals. So I'm glad you enjoyed the experience. You're welcome here every time that you want. So
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So that's it for today on our Water Connection. Thank you very much for listening and being part of our community. Your voice matter to us. Remember that. So by clicking on the send us a message link that you'll see in the description of this episode, you can tell us one thing that you learned from Annette today. Or maybe if you have any feedback or ideas for new episodes, I'm always there reading all of that. So please share them as well. We would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We're in Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, all of that, and in social media for any updates, highlights, and more ways to connect. Keep your curiosity flowing, and I'll see you next time.